The main goal of financial regulation in the United States is supposed to be the protection of consumers, investors, and their businesses from deception and fraud. Government agencies such as the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation should protect our interests and property rights from bad actors and criminals. Yet in far too many cases, the financial regulatory agencies that are supposed to be our useful servants have become arrogant masters. That's the introduction to a magnificent article recently published in National Review. When I read it, I agreed wholeheartedly. Then I looked to see who the author was, and it was none other than my friend Richard Morrison of the Competitive Enterprise Institute. He's an expert on corporate governance and finance regulation, in particular ESG theory. And Richard is visiting the Economic War Room today. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks so much for having me, Kevin.
Hey, I saw your great National Review article. I'm a fan of your podcast, Free the Economy, and I wanted to talk to you about how partisan bureaucrats have weaponized financial regulation. Then I want to drill down on how this impacts investors and what we ought to do about it. Can you give us the history of weaponized financial regulation? Did it start with choke point?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're seeing today is similar to what we saw during the Obama era. The regulators in the Obama era in the Treasury Department and the FDIC and other bank regulators like the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, decided they simply didn't like certain kinds of businesses, and especially certain kinds of small businesses. So using their influence as regulators of bigger banks, they went to banks and said, well, look, you have all these small business clients here, and they're sort of politically controversial, so maybe it would be better if you canceled their accounts and didn't service them anymore. And so the big banks, not wanting any high-level trouble from the regulators, shut down a lot of those small business accounts. This wasn't a plan that was announced anywhere, and it certainly wasn't something that was authorized by Congress. But it ended up impacting a lot of different small businesses all across the country in different industries, whether it's gold and silver coin dealers or payday lenders or gun manufacturers and gun shops. And it was only really pieced together when people started exchanging experiences, and then eventually Republican members of Congress found out about it and put forward a lot of effort to investigate it. And the Obama administration, once it was clear what they were doing, using illegitimate means to attack small businesses, backed off eventually.
They did eventually, and Governor Frank Keating, who was the head of the American Bankers Association, wrote brilliant articles. I met with him in D.C. about this, but these were legal businesses.
Absolutely.
We're not talking cannabis, although we see that with cannabis. What happens if the government decides that meat is bad for you and you ought to eat bugs, and then they decide to debank all of the meat producers or meat packers?
Well, exactly. Agricultural businesses are already being targeted both in the United States and then overseas in Europe. Some of your viewers and listeners may know about how agricultural businesses are being targeted over there because of climate change concerns and things like that. And what we've really seen is a lot of left-leaning policy advocates and politicians who couldn't get their preferred policies enacted. So in our case in Congress, or in some other cases overseas via legislature, they're trying to do them administratively, sort of via the back door without announcement, simply because they have oversight over certain industries. And so it's not a matter of any of these businesses having violated a law. It's simply almost sort of blackmail, where businesses will meet with a regulator and the regulators will say, well, we don't really like the way this looks, so it might be bad for you if you kept doing it. And a lot of businesses will take the hint.
Yeah, well, one of my best friends in college was became a senior FDIC bank examiner. Brilliant guy, but I can just imagine his marching orders. Go in and tell XYZ Bank that if they're doing business with an energy company that's traditional fossil fuel type energy, they're loaning money for hydraulic fracking. We don't like that fracking stuff. So we just think, it just seems a little riskier to us. He walks in and tells the bank president, if you got any fracking loans, it's going to make you look worse in the eyes of the FDIC. They don't even have to have it written down. They can just casually drop it. The next thing you know, the bank says, okay, get rid of those loans because it's going to make life harder for us. Is that what was going on?
Yeah, that's exactly what's going on, and exactly what we are unfortunately likely to see going forward. And one of you sort of like mentioned this, but one of the things that people who are pushing this policy will say, well, this is a matter of reputational risk, right? There's a risk to your firm if you get a bad reputation for servicing their own clients. So traditionally, a long time ago, reputational risk would be like a bank having a known terrorist as a customer or something. Right. That's pretty straightforward. Someone who's known for doing illegal things, so someone has a nefarious reputation, someone who's a serial fraudster, you probably wouldn't want to be doing business with a person like that and could give you a bad reputation if you did. But what the regulators are now trying to do, in the sort of left-wing policy proponents, is they're creating this risk out of nothing, right? Because they control the levers of power. They're regulating the banks. So the fact that they say there's something negative with your clients, by definition, creates reputational risk out of nowhere, right? Because if the regulators are looking askance at your business, they have the power, even if no one else in the world cares, even if no one else thinks that what you're doing is negative, the fact that the people holding all the law enforcement power are looking down their noses at you means they have created reputational risk where none existed before. And then they try to force you to follow their preferred policies because of that.
And they don't even have to explain it. I've got a dear friend, Nick Vujicic. He wrote the foreword to my book, Pirate Money. The guy was born without arms or legs. He spends his life going to high schools telling teenage girls, look, you may think you've got nothing to live for, but I have no arms and no legs, and I live for something. And, and he's talked to all these young ladies out of suicide. Literally, people will come up and say, I was going to kill myself until I heard you speak. One day he shows up at his bank, and it's exactly that. They won't tell him what he's done wrong. He's not on any terror watch list or whatever, but he spoke at a pro-life rally. Somebody thought that was bad policy for him to speak there. We can't have a pro-life, never mind the fact that a huge percentage of the American population is pro-life. We can't have you as a customer. You're high profile and you're pro-life. And so they just canceled his account. It took him a while to find another account. Now, you had actually a briefing that you did in the Congress on this. I've seen the YouTube. It was a panel discussion that you held in July. Exactly that. So we're going to have to take a break in a minute. But when we come back, I want to learn what you learned at the panel discussion. You were the moderator and you shared with some brilliant people. It touches on a lot of subjects that we touch on, debanking, cryptocurrency, and a lot of things. So right after this break, we'll be back with Richard Morrison talking about this panel discussion. In uncertain times, finding stability in the economy can feel challenging. But what if you could navigate economic volatility while honoring your biblical values? At Timothy Plan, they believe this balance is possible. Timothy Plan filters its volatility-weighted ETFs and family of mutual funds through a biblical pro-life and pro-family lens, so you can see competitive returns and moral responsibility, helping you to weather the economic storms. With Timothy Plan, align your investments with your values while adapting to our ever-changing culture. Since 1994, Timothy Plan has been recognized leader in biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, your bridge between faith, finances, and the future. Visit timothyplan.com or call 1-800-TIM-PLAN or 1-800-846-7526. Investing includes risk, including possible loss of principal. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com.
Somewhere a perversion has taken place. Our natural unalienable rights are now considered to be a dispensation of government, and freedom has never been so fragile, so close to slipping from our grasp as it is at this moment.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It has to be fought for and defended by each generation.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.
In this most critical time in our nation's history, now more than ever, Americans need to align with companies that support our constitutional rights and God-given freedoms. Patriot Mobile supports your values and provides exceptional 100% US-based customer service. Join the movement today. Go to patriotmobile.com or call 972-PATRIOT.
We're talking with Richard Morrison. He's from CEI, and they had a lunch briefing, De-Weaponization of Financial Regulation. I saw it. It's on YouTube. It's brilliant. Tell me what you learned at that panel discussion.
Yeah, so we looked at this, and we knew that government agencies abusing their power over the financial sector was not a new problem. And so we got three guests together to look at sort of the past, present, and future of this problem. So the past was what the Obama administration did, as we were discussing earlier, under Operation Choke Point. We had bank regulators coming in to big banks and pressuring them to debank small business, particular kinds of small business clients. Today, we have regulators really going after the cryptocurrency world. And so there are a lot of cryptocurrency businesses and investors who have had a terrible time getting and keeping bank accounts, even while minding all their P's and Q's in terms of legal lending and issuing. And then the future, I think, if we can, unless we can manage to prevent it, is a central bank digital currency, which I think something you've certainly talked about in the past, and that would be where, like in this case, the Federal Reserve would issue digital dollars, and they would have control over those dollars in a way that they don't now, which would give them an enormous amount of influence and authority over potentially how we spend and save and invest our money. While the advocates of digital currency or central bank digital currency would say, oh, well, of course, we would never abuse these powers. I think the history of government control over the economy in general suggests it might be a bit too terrible a temptation not for them to try and exert more control in the future under those circumstances. Well,
I've got a video we show with the Bank for International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, the World Economic Forum, every one of the panelists from those three, well-known globalist organizations, they say, hey, absolute control. This will give us control. They say that it's programmable. This money would be programmable. And the third one that goes straight to your point says that we could stop spending on things we deem, irresponsible, like munitions. He says ammunitions, but it's kind of slurred. Munitions, drugs, and pornography. And I said, wait a minute. We live in a Second Amendment nation. You have a right to buy ammunition as well as a gun and own it, but they lump them in together just casually. So anything that is deemed inappropriate, you can't spend your money. You can't, perhaps you've been subscriber to Blaze Television, where we are today. Well, maybe your money doesn't go to Blaze Television because we're accused of having malinformation, not disinformation, not misinformation, but malinformation, information that goes against the narrative. And so you can't even buy your Blaze subscription with your central bank digital currency. That's the kind of world I think we're facing.
Well, I think we've already seen examples of that, right? This would be much easier to do if all of our money was issued via central bank digital currency, and the people that are promoting it obviously know that. But if you look back to the Canadian trucker protests, right, you had the Canadian truckers were protesting against vaccine mandates in Canada back in 2021, and what happened when they tried to show up to protest what in this country would be their First Amendment right is the government under Prime Minister Trudeau basically froze all of their assets, right? Even without due process, right? The Trudeau government claimed to be invoking an extremely rarely used emergency power, but basically froze their bank accounts without a court order. Also attempted to cancel their vehicle insurance, since they're truckers and that's their job. They need that. And that was under current laws. That's without even this sort of central bank direct control of currency. So, and I'm sure there are any number of COVID policy maniacs in this country, right, who would have been happy for the U.S. government to have had that power during that time when the sort of left-wing policy people said that there should be lockdowns of everything under the sun. So it would be dangerously easy for someone trying to manipulate policy in this country under a digital currency regime to freeze your bank account, to cancel your insurance, to stop you from spending or going anywhere. And it's not just, the important thing I think here is that it's not just a matter of dollars and cents, right? Of course, we don't want anyone, stealing money from our bank account, but it's, like you said, a Second Amendment in the case of people going after gun rights, and it's a First Amendment freedom that we're talking about. It's your freedom to be a citizen, to live as a free human being, which I think ultimately, as much as we might love to see, that money pile up our investment accounts, that's ultimately the more important freedom that's at issue here.
Yeah, well, and I know we live in a constitutional republic, and people, every time I say democracy, they write in and such. I know we live in a constitutional republic, but I noticed that the Trudeau finance minister actually even said, if you're a Trump supporter, you ought to lose your bank account. He said the quiet part out loud and just flat out. And I know that, Mayor Bloomberg said you shouldn't be allowed to drink more than 16 ounces of soda. I've seen people talk about central bank digital currency. You should only be able to buy 1 cup of coffee a day, and we have the ability to limit, your consumption. So you eat bugs. Why would private businesses go along with this? Is it to limit their competition, to curry favors, personal bias, to create winners and losers? What's their motivation to do this? Because it's not the profit incentive.
Right. I think so. I think those things you quickly mentioned. It's probably a mix of a lot of those things. But the most important is to not want to anger the people who directly regulate them. I think a lot of our conservative friends in the world have looked at corporate policies they don't like and corporate policies they think that specifically disadvantage conservative viewpoints, and they've assumed that it must be progressive, it must be lefties in these big corporations, that they just want to fight the culture war against us. And I'm sure, especially in like big tech companies that are based in, California, I'm sure there's plenty of left-wing employees there who are making their influence felt. But ultimately, I think the very most important of all of these is that there is covert, and that's a very important part, that it's not part of the regular due process. It's covert influence coming from these administrative bureaucrats, these people in the administrative state, some people call it the deep state, where they have a very particular view of the world. They have a globalist view of the world in which they want to be, aligned with all the other left-wing bureaucrats in the EU and other places, but they also have a view that it's their job to manage the economy and manage the choices of American citizens, and they make their influence felt through the corporate, some people think it was the corporate overlords, but the corporate managers, and that they just decide that it's easier to go along to get along, and that is where it's mostly coming from.
If the government were paying us to produce mud pies, American capitalist corporations would produce lots and lots and lots of mud pies. The government is using their influence to control you, and this is a very dangerous thing. All right, we need to take another break. When we come back, we'll wrap up with solutions. Here's a $10 bill. It's got the picture of Alexander Hamilton on the front of it. It's kind of sad. When I was 10 years old, everything that I could buy for $1 now costs about $10. That's the cost of inflation. It's just paper. It's not backed by anything. You can't exchange it for gold and silver. You used to, but you can't do that anymore. And that's unfortunate. Pirates wouldn't accept this. Pirates, they wanted gold and silver. Patriots, the founders of this nation, also wanted gold and silver coin. In fact, they put a provision in the Constitution, 17 words, that said states could only make gold and silver coins tender within the states. That's why I wrote this new book, Pirate Money, Discovering the Founders' Hidden Plan for Economic Justice and Defeating the Great Reset. It will explain exactly the history of money and exactly why gold and silver coins can be made modern with new technology and a useful monetary system. PirateMoneyBook.com. We've been talking with Richard Morrison, and we've been talking about how partisan bureaucrats weaponize financial regulation. And like the ultimate for them, their Death Star is central bank digital currency. If they get that enacted, they completely control everything. And we're going to talk solutions in this section. And our solution, just as a reminder for all our viewers, is state-based transactional gold and silver. We call it pirate money. You can learn more at piratemoneybook.com or transactionalgold.com. But with Richard, we've got to stop this. there's some government actions, there's some personal actions, some private actions. What do we do? Tell us about Jim Jordan and the select subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government, because I know you watch that closely.
Yeah, Jim Jordan, the Republican congressman from Ohio, is chairman of the Judiciary Committee, but he's also also chairman of the committee. He created that select committee on the weaponization of the federal government. And, he and his committee members have been doing a great job exposing just that, instances where federal bureaucrats have been weaponizing their power to disadvantage and denude the civil rights of Americans. And so he's been looking at what happened with COVID policy and social media moderation, but also some things like this in terms of financial regulation. And so just like with Operation Choke Point under the Obama administration, it was members of Congress, mostly Republican members of Congress, who exposed that and held those bureaucrats up to public view. So, they couldn't pretend they weren't doing what they were really doing. And again, the reason why that kind of oversight, congressional oversight, is so important is because these aren't publicly announced initiatives, right? They're not constitutionally authorized things. They're not the normal work of those agencies. Again, like when we said at the very beginning of the show, that the job of those agencies is to stop force and fraud, not to force businesses and American citizens to transact one way or another. So because they're not publicly announced, you need the power of members of Congress to get to the truth, right? So we can sort of piece together a little bit of what is happening because people talk to each other, right? People in the same industry talk to each other, or you and I might see each other at a conference or an event and share some information. But you need the congressional staff and the congressional members and their authority to really bring these things to light and force government agents, the heads of government agencies, to answer their questions. Because if I ask them, they're probably not going to respond to me. And if almost anyone but a sitting member of Congress asks them, they're not going to respond. But when they get that subpoena to testify before, Congressman Jordan's committee, they almost have to respond. And not responding itself becomes a news story.
Yeah, and we've seen this at state level, too, where they've called in on ESG, like Brian Hughes called in BlackRock to come and testify in Texas. And, they don't like that scrutiny. How about the role of the courts? What role can courts play in protecting the rights of American citizens?
I think federal courts have an extremely important role to play in protecting the rights of American citizens in this area, where government agents are acting outside of their constitutional authority, outside of their legislative statutory authority, and are violating rights, like you said. We talked about First Amendment rights and Second Amendment rights too, because Second Amendment rights are often under attack in this area. We have actually recently some very good Supreme Court precedents, right? We have the case of West Virginia versus APA. It's from a couple of years ago that says federal agencies can't just invent new powers for themselves. They can't expand their authority without Congress giving them that ability. And then in the case of New York, there was a case of NRA versus Vullo, in which a state bureaucrat was trying to pressure all of the banks and financial institutions that did business with the National Rifle Association into closing down those business relationships. And the Supreme Court unanimously ruled just recently that that is absolutely not legitimate, and smacked down the state financial services director in New York State, saying that you can't use government pressure to accomplish something that would not be legal to do on your own, and that was specifically in the case of finance regulation and business relationships. So those two, and one called Loper Bright, which sort of reversed the presumption in federal courts that federal courts would defer to the judgment of a federal agency. So that was what's the so-called Chevron doctrine of deference. Previously, federal courts would basically, to split the difference, they would let the agency get the last word. And now the Supreme Court has said, no, trial court judges have to decide on the facts on their own without giving that deference to the government. So those are three two very recent, one a couple years ago. Those three precedents are very strong, and I think we have just barely begun to test where that will take us in positive directions.
Yeah, I think the Jercasey case also with the SEC was another positive one where the SEC can't just come in and be, they were the fact finder, they were the judge, the jury, and then the executioner, and the courts ruled against them on that. So tell us about the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Tell us about your podcast. Where can people follow you and support you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kevin. So the Competitive Enterprise Institute, we're a nonpartisan think tank that we're celebrating 40 years of fighting for free markets. So we do a lot of work on the administrative agencies, sometimes the not as sexy, not as exciting detail stuff. And that's everything from the Food and Drug Administration to the Securities and Exchange Commission, all of those alphabet agencies that are passing important but often not as noticed rules that affect you, affect your family, affect your finances. We try and keep them honest and push back whenever we can. So we, like you said, we also have a podcast, which I'm the host of, called Free the Economy, which again is about economic freedom and opportunity in America. So that comes out every Thursday morning. You can find it on all the podcast platforms. We've had quite a few guests that are relevant to the topic here we're talking about, including just recently Nick Morgan, who he sues the SEC for a living. So he has a lot to say about the Jercasey case and administrative law and judges and things like that. So if you want to look me up, I'm at all my work is at cei.org, and you can find me on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, at my name, at Richard Morrison.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to summarize all this in a free economic battle plan, and we're going to tell you how you personally can apply what we've just heard from Richard and in your own life to protect your own liberty. And we've supported the NSIC Institute, National Security Investment Consultant Institute, to fight ESG. We've got Pirate Money, piratemoneybook.com. All of these things are to support liberty, security, and values. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.